Well, it's a whole new year. For the last 8 months at least, we've heard people saying things like 2020 was the worst year ever. Can't wait for it to be over. Often when we experience tough times or circumstances in a year, we long for the passing of December 31st, and then flipping the calendar instills new hope for many. Our thoughts turn to a fresh start and new beginnings. But what's really changed, other than the date, especially in this year? COVID is not aware that we are starting a fresh cycle. Our circumstances are pretty similar to what they were 4 days ago. That's why we need the encouragement to keep on going. In our life, there are highs and lows. We can read in the ancient scriptures that Jesus, in fact, even told his friends that tough times would come for all of them. Obviously, he was speaking about his arrest and his death, and actually told them that there would be a time when they would be scattered to their own homes and they would leave him. And he said, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world." Yes, we will have troubles, but should our troubles stop us in our tracks? Should we stop moving forward because normalcy has ended? No, we have to discover the hope and the reasons why we need to keep on going.
I gotta keep going.
See, many of us are overwhelmed. COVID has shut down. Just a second. Many of us are overwhelmed. COVID has shut down many aspects of life that we took for granted. Why can't we gather as a whole church? What does that mean for me as a follower of Jesus? What does that mean as God's church? Some are sick, some have died, some have lost or limited their sources of income. Countless tragedy is happening on a global scale. Food shortages, hurricanes, typhoons, fires, and floods. How do we care for people in these times? Many feel greater isolation, people drifting from the life of God's church. Some of us struggle with practicing the things that we learn and discover. Why is it that Paul said in the scriptures, "I don't know what I'm doing because I don't do what I want to do. Instead, I do the things that I hate"? For all these reasons, we need to keep on going and encouraging each other. So over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at a few reasons why it's important to persevere, to continue in a course of action, even in the face of difficulty or with little or even no indication of success. Then we'll take 2 weeks at looking at the practical. How do we keep on going? When we experience little change or momentum, how do we persevere? So let's dive right in. So here's the first reason why it's important to keep going. It's the main way to resist the power of evil, to outlast the enemy, to frustrate Satan's attacks. Consider the Apostle Paul said this, "Friends, we don't want you to be unaware of the trouble that we went through in Asia. We were weighed down with a load of suffering that was so far beyond our strength that we were afraid we might not survive. It certainly seemed to us as if we had gotten the death penalty. This was so that we would have confidence in God, who raises the dead, instead of confidence in ourselves." Evil is so present in our world, right? Paul often spoke of the suffering that they experienced in life, and we forget that as followers of Jesus, we're called to spiritual battle, and there will be suffering. And a main strategy to win that spiritual battle is perseverance. Ephesians says, "Therefore pick up the full armor of God so that you can stand your ground on the evil day. And after you have done everything possible to still stand, so stand with the belt of truth around your waist." justice as your breastplate. This idea of standing firm. There's lots of things we do and use to help us stand. But in the end, we are only standing if we get back up again. And it's the getting back up that is the perseverance. And that perseverance wins the day. Pastor Ray Dirksen tells a story of how his mother-in-law would get sick every Saturday night and get very little sleep. Then come Sunday morning, when she wanted to get up and gather for a prayer time with others from her church community, she was just too tired and wiped to go. So one Saturday evening, she spoke out and said to the enemy, "Go ahead and make me sick if you like, but I am going to gather and pray in the morning anyways." Well, she powered through and gathered to pray the next morning and was never sick on Saturday night again. I think that can be a reality more often. Perseverance is one thing that I am not very good at, but I often don't think that I'm trusting God to give the perseverance to me. Instead, I'm trying to conjure it up myself, just sheer willpower, and I don't have that. You see, Satan is constantly hoping that people will give up, that our circumstances, the tasks in front of us, or the daily instances of life will be too much for us to endure. Now, that's not to say that sometimes we need to step away from a situation. It totally depends on what God is asking us to do, which is why it's so important to listen for what God is saying. I've given up on stuff and I've come to regret it and learned that I just kind of take the problems with me into the next job or next relationship or whatever it might be. But then I've experienced times when God's Holy Spirit has given me permission to walk away. There was a clear indication that it was time, and not for selfish reasons. In fact, selfishly, I would have endured because I can just be stubborn like that. But to know that perseverance is measured within the parameters of God's will for you. It is possible to step away from a situation and still be standing firm, persevering because God directed it. We can stay in circumstances because we want to persevere, but we've lost the heart, the passion. We just kind of coast along, just choosing the path of least resistance. We don't want trouble, and so you stay, but you've given up. But that is not persevering. It's giving up and losing the fight in us. So in the situations that we face, look for God, ask God, listen and obey, because the winner will always be the one who doesn't give up. One thing God made very clear to me over the last few weeks is that if we stick it out, the devil will not. Think of Jesus' temptation by Satan in the wilderness. Jesus is fasting and praying, and Satan comes to Jesus and kind of entices him with food and power and says to give him a display of Jesus' might and strength. And Jesus refuses to give in each time and finally says, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then we're given these key words in the scriptures. It says, the devil left him. Then the devil left him, and angels came and tended him. If you keep on going, if Satan knows that you will endure, he will give up all the sooner. So I may have shared this story with some of you before, but years and years ago, before we had kids, Jen and I were married, and she was working for Bible college and went on a conference up north. So I attended with her, and she actually bought for me this treetop trekking experience. And so while she was working the day at the conference, I left the hotel we were staying at and got to go on this treetop trekking adventure and high ropes course. And showed up, and there was just myself and a couple teenage girls. And so they said, well, you should go ahead of us because you probably know what you're doing. You've never done this before. I said, well, I've never done it before, but I do probably know what I'm doing more than you. And so we went on we did a few different courses, but there was 3 different ones, and the last one was this expert course. And so you had to clip your carabiner in the entire time and be on those ropes, and half the time they were guided ropes that you would walk across from treetop to treetop, and other times they were zip lines. So they said if they were marked with a yellow tag, it was a zip line, and so you had to attach your pulley system to the zip line cable and then detach your other carabiner for the ropes, and then you would zip across and then reattach your carabiner and take off your pulley. And then if it was a red tag, you would just keep your pulley system, or keep your carabiner system on the ropes, and you would walk across. So I got to this one point where it looked like just a long straight walk across from tree to tree. And so I hooked my rope carabiner onto the top cable, and then there was a rope underneath which I was walking on. And so I started to walk across, and I was way ahead of everybody else. Walking across, it was perilous and exciting and adventurous. And but as I kept walking, I saw the rope was starting to really bow under my weight, and the rope and the cable were getting further and further apart. And it's a good thing I'm as tall as I am, but I got about 3/4 of the way across, completely stretched out and could barely even reach anymore. And my arms were getting fatigued, my shoulders were hurting, and pretty soon I was just basically hanging by my arms. And I just kept going. And finally one of the girls came up that was behind me, and she looked out at where I was stuck, basically, and she said, "This has got a yellow tag on it. It's a zip line." Well, I should have attached my pulley system and just glided across. But instead, I wasn't paying attention, and I kept my carabiner on and got extremely fatigued and made things way more difficult than it needed to be, and eventually became stranded and was just holding on. And I was probably only maybe 6 feet from the tree, and I just did not want to give up, and I just kept reaching for it. And eventually they had to say, "We need a rescue," called up on the radio, "We need a rescue on Red 3 course, man stuck." And it was a humbling experience. I had to get rescued by this individual, and the girls went on ahead of me, and I got to finish the course, but I was so winded and fatigued at that point. I was completely exhausted. The whole rest of the course was super difficult, and the whole rest of the day I couldn't use my arms. They were just like hanging like sausages beside me because I couldn't even lift them. And so I tell you that story just because I felt that tenacity of not being able to give up. I couldn't do it, but I didn't want to quit. And I did have to eventually get rescued. And sometimes the only effective weapon in the trials we face is just saying, "I'm going to die before I let this thing go." And that was kind of my attitude. Sometimes the only effective weapon in the trials we face is just saying, "I'm going to die before I let this thing go." And that was my attitude on that ropes course. I was going to fall before I was going to give up trying to get across. Or as it says in Revelation chapter 12, it says, "They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death." See, it's the weapon of endurance that finally convinces the evil one that they have to give up. They don't have power. Have you ever thought, what if I quit just minutes away from victory? God has ensured the defeat of the darkness, so it's the victory's not in question, but who shares in that victory may still be in question. See, I know that God doesn't leave us out of this victory. It's this big win. He's given us responsibility in it, though. We're co-workers with Jesus to establish a good world and the destruction of evil. God is waiting for his people to rise up and take hold of the victory that he secured on the cross. Have you considered that if we don't drive back the powers of darkness in this world, they will not be driven back? And every time you resolve to personal improvement, desiring more of God, spiritual renewal, you want to make good in the world, you're going to face spiritual oppression from the enemy, because the enemy hates what is good for you. You must keep on going and not give up and drift back towards mediocrity. Here's a second reason to keep on going when times are tough. It is essential for growing our character. To persevere, it grows our character. I recall my good friend Ron Jones. He was the business manager at the college that I attended, and he had a sign up in his office that said, "Tough times don't last. tough people do. And I loved that. In James chapter 1, it says, "Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Character counts. You know that to grow character in our kids and when you're raising young people, you don't want them to give up, and sometimes we have to struggle and battle things in order to get the strength to keep moving forward. So developing of character counts. I used to be part of a board of directors for an organization called Community of Character, and we promoted key character qualities that we would agree would improve our schools, workplaces, every space in our community. And each month we dedicated to focus and promote one of these character traits in all these places. So responsibility, perseverance, optimism, honesty, fairness, integrity, inclusion, respect, empathy, courage, and compassion. And each month was dedicated to one of those. Well, guess where these things come from? They come from God. And we grow in godly character because God promises that through this we experience His precious and wonderful promises that we can share in the divine nature. Wow, sharing in the divine nature? That's in the book of 1 Peter. So consider this, having godly character makes us fruitful in this lifetime. It says in 2 Peter chapter 1, it affects our outcome of our prayers, as it says in James chapter 4. It keeps us from falling away from God, as it says in 2 Peter chapter 1. It qualifies us for ministry. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, it says that. It helps us overcome the devil, as it talks about in Ephesians chapter 6. It reveals Christ to others if we grow in godly character, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. It's a requisite for experiencing the abundant life that God offers, as it says in John chapter 15. Godly character also is needed to effectively operate the gifts of the Holy Spirit in us, as it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It also determines our heavenly reward, according to 2 Peter chapter 1. These promises are too good to pass up, and so perseverance develops character, which then leads to all these promises that God says is going to happen in our lives. So we keep persevering and following God so that we share in the divine nature. Then you're going to experience spiritual renewal, regardless of your circumstances or the world's pandemics or death or despair. And that's incredible. So how do we grow in character? Well, one is through proper response to the daily pressures and irritations of life, not giving up. Through the proper response to the pressures of dealing with difficult people, not giving up. Through proper responses to the pressures associated with meeting the needs of our spouse, our family, our friends, we don't give up. Also through us properly responding in the middle of suffering and trials, not giving up. And through the proper response to God's discipline in our lives, don't give up. And by initiating this process ourselves. See, you have to want it. No one can live your life of faith for you or hand it to you on a platter. So as you look at this list and realize that to respond properly to all these never-ending pressures, man, it's going to require this singular trait of perseverance. Keep on going. Perhaps that's why it's considered one of the chief traits to attain in the life of following Jesus. So as you start this new year, may you choose for yourself whom you will serve, who you're going to be influenced by. You got to serve somebody. Are you going to serve yourself? Will you serve the pressures of people around you and what they expect? Will you choose to persevere and full court press toward God and discover that everything can really fall in line and you can start to experience the promises of God and have Him start to give you everything you need to handle the toughest times? 2021. Now is the time. Jesus is calling us toward him. Don't give up. Keep on going. Peace. Have a good week. I just want to encourage you to hit all the like buttons on this video. It helps us to know that you're watching. As well, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our Facebook page and our Instagram, and do ask how you can be included in one of our tiny village churches.